Good afternoon, folks. It is 5:01. We got started just a moment late, so we're going to give just a minute for the room to fill up here, and then we will go ahead and get started. So sit tight for just a moment here. All right, it looks like the numbers have started to slow down. So good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Olson. I'm going to be the facilitator of the meeting here tonight. We are going to officially start the meeting at 5:02. So thank you everyone for joining us here. I'm going to give just a real high-level introduction of the meeting before I turn it over to Karen with opening remarks. So can we go to the next slide, please, Monica? So here's a look at our agenda. I'm going to do just a very quick overview of the agenda. We've got BOEM has got a presentation. The Army Corps have got a presentation. The meeting's going to be broken into three parts. So the first part is presentation. Second part will be public comment, and then the final part will be question and answer. So if you when you pre-registered for the meeting, if you indicated a desire to speak at tonight's meeting, I've got you on my list. But I ask that anyone that wants to speak, including those that did so during registration, please raise your hand. We'll call on folks in the number that they either pre-registered or we receive them tonight. We will limit comments tonight to 5 minutes. This is just one way in which you can provide comments to this project. At the end of the 5 minutes, we will ask that you submit the remaining of your comments in writing. We'll take a quick break after the comment section, and then we'll come back for Q&A. If you've got a question that you would like to ask tonight, we do ask that you put it in the Q&A. So we'll go through logistics and how to maneuver between the icons here in just a minute, but I'm going to turn it over to Karen for opening remarks.
Thank you, Todd. Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Baker, and I am the Chief of the Office of Renewable Energy Programs at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. Welcome to BOEM's last of 3 virtual public hearings to discuss the draft environmental impact statement for the New England Wind Project offshore Massachusetts. The first 2 were held on January 27th and February 1st. For those of you who aren't familiar with BOEM, we are a federal bureau within the Department of the Interior that oversees the development of our energy and mineral resources in the nation's outer continental shelf, or OCS. The OCS extends in most areas from about 3 miles offshore to the full extent of the exclusive economic zone, approximately 200 miles offshore. BOEM is responsible for the expeditious and orderly development of the energy resources of the OCS, including renewables like offshore wind. It's our job to ensure this development is done in an environmentally and economically responsible way. This process starts with public input, data gathering, analysis, and leasing. After many years, we now have 27 active commercial leases for offshore wind in the Atlantic. As we've mentioned, we're here today to discuss the draft environmental impact statement for the New England Wind Project, one of those 27 leases. Your participation and feedback today are essential to BOEM's renewable energy program and plays a vital role in our environmental analysis of the proposed project in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. BOEM would also like to note on behalf of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that these virtual public hearings will serve as the public hearings for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Section 10 and Section 404 permit review. Tammy Turley, the Chief of the Regulatory Division of the New England District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, will also be providing a brief opening statement today. Thank you for joining us. We had nearly 60 individuals pre-register to attend today's meeting, and there are a dozen or so members here in the staff who are prepared to hear your comments. We had several who have registered for public comments, and we're looking forward to hearing those throughout the evening tonight. We have the BOEM staff here to give you information as needed, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you. So we'll now turn it over to Todd, and we'll continue with the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. It's also being captured by a court reporter to capture the transcript. So we're going to get through 2 presentations. After the presentation, we're going to take a brief break, and then it'll be time for public comment at that time. And again, just ground rules, we ask that we're all respectful. We want to be respectful of each other and also respectful of each other's time. So there will be, when we get to the comment section, I've got a list of 6 folks that have indicated a desire to speak. I'll call on them one at a time. When I call on you, you'll receive a message that says the host would like you to unmute. Click on the unmute button, and then I ask that you say and spell your first and last name, any organization that you're with, and then you'll have 5 minutes in which to share your comments to the project. And again, if you have a question that you want to hear an answer to tonight, you do need to type that question into the Q&A. So the 3 functions at the bottom of your screen, the chat, if you've got any question or any technical issues during the meeting tonight, you can reach out in the chat and we'll do our best to try to help you. Raise your hand if you'd like to speak. If you've already signed up to speak, great. Get your hand in the air. I'll call on you. If you didn't pre-register to speak, go ahead and put your hand up, and we'll get to everyone during the meeting today and allow you your 5 minutes. And then there's the Q&A. And again, if you do have a question you'd like to hear an answer to tonight, you do need to type your question into the Q&A in order to receive a response. So we'll get through the comment section, and then we're going to take another 5-minute break. When we come back from that break, we will be closing the question time, and that's when we'll start providing answers to all the questions that we received. So again, any questions, technology in the chat, questions in the Q&A, and you can start right now with raising your hand, and I'm keeping a list of folks that would like to speak when we get to the comment period. If there's anyone on the phone, I don't believe there is, but if you are on the phone, please, it's *9 in order to raise your hand. Next slide, please, Monica. If you are here with the media and you've got a question, we ask that you please reach out to Lisa at lisa.eng@boem.gov. One more slide. And just further instructions on Q&A in the chat and raising your hand. So, all right, with that, we're going to turn it over to Christine. Next slide, please, Monica, and we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation.
Thanks, Todd. So hello, my name is Christine Crumpton, and I am the BOEM Environmental Coordinator for the New England Wind Project. And this afternoon, I'll be presenting an overview of the draft EIS, the Draft Environmental Impact Statement. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'd like to do is point out some additional resources that are available on BOEM's virtual meeting room webpage for the draft EIS. The webpage address is provided at the bottom of this slide, and if you haven't already, we'd encourage you to browse the additional content available there, which includes posters on these topics in the virtual meeting room. Next slide, please. So this EIS is being developed under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which requires federal agencies to assess the environmental effects of any major federal action that may significantly affect the quality of the human environment. So this EIS must also provide an analysis of reasonable alternatives and the direct, indirect, and cumulative effects of the project. The NEPA process also includes public scoping and a minimum 45-day public comment period on the draft EIS. And this project has a 60-day public comment period. The NEPA process collects relevant information for the decision maker to make an informed decision on whether to approve with conditions, or disapprove the proposed New England Wind construction and operations plan. Next slide, please. So the start of this project's NEPA process includes BOEM's issuance of the Notice of Intent to Prepare this EIS, or NOI, which was published back on June 30th, 2021, opening a 30-day comment period, which closed on July 30th, 2021. During that time, BOEM also held 3 virtual scoping meetings on July 19th, 23rd, and July 26th, 2021. In fall of 2021, BOEM received an updated COP to incorporate additional cable routing variants for the phase 2 offshore export cables. So BOEM then issued a notice of additional public scoping and name change in the Federal Register, which opened a second public comment period on November 22nd, 2021, and closed on December 22nd, 2021. A scoping summary report, which summarizes the comments and significant issues that were raised during both scoping periods, was also prepared and is available on BOEM's New England Wind Project webpage. Next slide, please. So the Notice of Availability of the Draft EIS, or NOA, was published in the Federal Register on December 23rd, 2022. This is the last of 3 virtual public hearings scheduled for this project, and the 60-day comment period on the draft EIS closes on February 21st, 2023. Next slide, please. So now we'll move to a brief overview of the New England Wind Project. So this project is being proposed on BOEM lease OCSA 0534, which was designated as a new lease back in June of 2021. Prior, it was encompassed by BOEM lease 0501, which is now assigned to Vineyard Wind 1 LLC. So the proposed lease area is located roughly about 20 miles from the southwest corner of Martha's Vineyard and about 24 miles from Nantucket and immediately southwest of Vineyard Wind 1. The project is proposed to be constructed in 2 phases. Phase 1 is also known as Park City Wind, and Phase 2 is also known as Commonwealth Wind. And throughout this presentation, each phase will be referred to as either Phase 1 or Phase 2. Using the project design envelope or PDE approach, the construction and operations plan proposes a range of parameters which BOEM is analyzing under the proposed action. So offshore, the project proposes up to 129 wind turbine generators, or WTGs, spaced at 1 nautical mile apart, 1 to 5 offshore substations, and about 296 nautical miles of inter-array cables connecting the turbines to the offshore substations. A total of 5 offshore export cables in an offshore export cable corridor, or OECC, from the offshore electrical service platforms connecting to the onshore components in Barnstable County, Massachusetts. So in the event of technical, logistical, grid interconnection, or other unforeseen issues, the project also proposes 2 contingency cable route variants for Phase 2. And this may include additional onshore components in Bristol County, Massachusetts, which we'll talk a little more about in the next slide. Next slide, please. As mentioned previously, the New England Wind Project proposes a total of 5 offshore export cables in an OECC from the offshore electrical service platforms connecting to the onshore components in Barnstable, Massachusetts. And the OECC is shown in this figure in orange. All 2 cables for Phase 1 are proposed to be installed in the OECC. For Phase 2, in the event of technical, logistical, grid interconnection, or other unforeseen issues, the project proposes 2 contingency cable route variants, which are shown here in gray and purple. And also shown in this figure, you'll see that the details regarding the landing locations and the onshore components have not been identified for the South Coast variant, which is the route in the figure in light purple. So the project proposes a number of scenarios for which route the cables for Phase 2 may be installed. The table on this slide shows those scenarios in order of likelihood. So for example, scenario 1, for which all 3 Phase 2 cables would be installed in the Eastern Muskeget OECC, is the most likely scenario. And scenario 6, for which all 3 Phase 2 cables would be installed in the South Coast variant, is the least likely scenario. Next slide, please. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so for each phase, a range is proposed for the number of turbines, as the final number is dependent on the final engineering and design of the project. So Phase 1 could include a minimum of 41 and a maximum of 62 WTGs and up to 2 ESPs, while Phase 2, dependent on the build out of Phase 1, could include up to 88 WTGs and 3 electrical service platforms. Up to 10 positions in the Vineyard Wind 1 lease area, if they're not developed by Vineyard Wind, could be developed as part of the New England Wind Project, which is shown in this figure in the blue and purple striped area. Further, ESPs may be located at any WTG ESP position, which is indicated by the purple dots in this figure. ESPs may be located at separate positions, or 2 of the ESPs may be co-located at one of the potential grid positions. For phase 2, ESPs could also be mounted on the same foundation as a WTG. Next slide, please. So the turbines would have a maximum blade tip height of up to 1,171 feet, a hub height of 702 feet, and a rotor diameter of up to 935 feet, as shown in the figure on the left. So the maximum electrical service platform, or ESP, topside height above mean lower low water is 230 feet. And the figure in the middle shows a representative figure of an ESP and also a conceptual drawing of a combined WTG ESP. For phase 1, monopile and pin pile jacket foundations are proposed foundation types for WTGs and ESPs. And for phase 2, proposed foundation types include monopile jacket or bottom frame foundations, and either pin piles or suction buckets could be used with the jacket and bottom frame foundations. Conceptual drawings of each of the proposed foundation types are in the figure on the bottom right. Scour protection consisting of rock may be used around all foundations if needed. The figure in the top right is a representative figure of scour protection installed around the base of a monopile foundation. There are several types of cable protection proposed, including rock, concrete mattresses, half-shell pipes, and gabion rock bags. The design envelope also conservatively assumes that up to 6% of cables in the OACC could require secondary cable protection, and up to 2% of the total length of the inter-array and interlink cables could require cable protection. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, the offshore export cables for both phase 1 and phase 2 would make landfall in Barnstable, Massachusetts. The ocean to land transition would use horizontal directional drilling, or HDD, below the shoreline to minimize surface disturbance. So, however, phase 1 and phase 2 would have separate landfall locations and onshore routes. Phase 1 would make landfall more specifically at Craigville Beach or Covels Beach in Barnstable. The 2 underground transmission cables would travel approximately 6.5 miles from the landfall location up to a substation at 8 Chute Flying Hill Road, ultimately connecting to the grid at the existing West Barnstable substation. Next slide, please. So the phase 2 offshore export cables would make landfall at Dowseas Beach or Weano Avenue in Barnstable. The 3 underground transmission cables would travel approximately 10.6 miles from the landfall location up to the proposed substation at 8 Chute Flying Hill Road, and also would ultimately connect to the grid at the existing West Barnstable substation. As previously mentioned, details for the onshore components of the South Coast variant, if it is used, have not been provided at this time, but would be located in Bristol County, Massachusetts. Next slide, please. So the project has an estimated operational life of 30 years. At the end of the project's operational life, it would be decommissioned in accordance with the detailed project decommissioning plan developed in compliance with applicable laws, regulations, and best management practices at that time, and would be subject to BOEM review and approval. All facilities will be removed to a depth of 15 feet below the mudline unless otherwise authorized by BOEM. And BOEM's implementing regulations at 30 CFR 585 provide specific financial security requirements for OCS projects and requires the lessee to provide a surety bond or other form of financial assurance. BOEM also requires leaseholders to prepare conceptual decommissioning plans when their project is first proposed, and requires more detailed plans for evaluation at the time decommissioning is requested. Next slide, please. So BOEM has been in ongoing consultations with federally recognized tribal nations throughout the development of the draft EIS. This slide presents a summary of some, but not all, of the government-to-government consultation and coordination efforts that have occurred since publication of the Notice of Intent to prepare the draft EIS. Next slide, please. So BOEM is using the NEPA substitution process to fulfill its Section 106 obligations under the National Historic Preservation Act. There are currently 30 consulting parties on the New England Wind Project under Section 106, and those include tribal nations, federal agencies, state and local governments, and non-governmental organizations. So BOEM has conducted one consulting party meeting to date for this project, with additional consultation meetings to be scheduled as needed throughout spring and summer of 2023. Next slide, please. So to highlight some notable sections of the draft EIS, chapters 1, 2, and 3 of the main body contain purpose and need, alternatives, including those eliminated from detailed analysis and why, and an assessment of the environmental consequences for each alternative. The PDE parameters and maximum case scenario are described in detail in Appendix C. The cumulative impact scenario, also referred to as the planned activity scenario in the draft EIS, is provided in Appendix E. Appendix G includes the assessment of resources determined to have minor or lower impacts. Appendix H contains the lessee's mitigation measures as proposed in the COP and other potential mitigation and reporting requirements identified for consideration by BOEM in the draft EIS. And Appendix J contains the Section 106 finding of adverse effects and draft Section 106 memorandum of agreement. Next slide, please. So the draft EIS evaluates the no action alternative, which would be the disapproval of the proposed construction and operations plan. When analyzing the impacts of the no action alternative on each resource, BOEM considered the impacts of past and ongoing trends and activities, which includes ongoing non-offshore wind and ongoing offshore wind activities on the baseline. BOEM also separately analyzes how resource conditions will be affected over time as reasonably foreseeable activities are implemented. The cumulative impacts of the no action alternative considered the impacts of the no action alternative in combination with other planned non-offshore wind and offshore wind activities as described in Appendix E, planned activity scenario. Next, the draft EIS also analyzes the proposed action, which is the project as proposed in the COP. That was summarized earlier in the presentation. And lastly, it analyzes the action alternative, the habitat impact minimization alternative, which I'll discuss in a little more detail in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So before we get into the action alternative, just wanted to share a note on the South Coast variant. So the South Coast variant is analyzed as part of the proposed action in the draft EIS. However, it is a contingency route with limited details included in the COP for review at this time. And if the South Coast variant is necessary, the applicant would be required to file a revision to their construction operations plan or COP, describing the need for the South Coast variant and providing the information necessary for us to complete a sufficient analysis. So in response, BOEM would complete additional environmental analysis and relevant consultations required by the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, and other applicable statutes to inform BOEM's decision to approve with conditions, or disapprove the COP revision. Next slide, please. So alternative C1, which is the Western Muskeget variant avoidance alternative, would preclude the use of the Western Muskeget variant, which is the reroute shown in gray, limiting available cable route scenarios to those that include only the Eastern Muskeget route, or the OECC, which is shown in red in the figure, and the South Coast variant, which is shown partially in this figure in light purple. By removing the option of the Western Muskeget variant, this alternative would limit the total number of potential crossings of the Mayflower Wind project cable, shown in green, to a single crossing south of Muskeget Channel, which has potentially less biogenic structure than the additional crossing that would occur within the channel if the Western Muskeget variant route were used. Because cable crossings typically require protective structures such as half-shell pipes in lieu of burial, which could damage or destroy complex habitat features, By minimizing the number of cable crossings among the two projects, this alternative could potentially reduce impacts on complex benthic habitat. Next slide, please. So alternative C2 is the Eastern Muskeget Route Minimization Alternative and was developed in response to National Marine Fisheries Services, or NIPS, preference for all project offshore export cables to be routed through the Western Muskeget variant to minimize impacts on more productive, hard complex habitat along the OECC. Information provided from the developer as well as BOEM subject matter expert review determined that it is not feasible for all 5 project cables to be installed in the Western Muskeget variant for a number of technical reasons regarding the existing conditions in the area, including high scour potential and steep slopes. So however, alternative C2 maximizes the use of the Western Muskeget variant by limiting the number of phase 2 cables installed in the OECC or the Eastern Muskeget route to 1, thus minimizing the amount of seafloor disturbance in the OECC in areas of hard complex habitat. Next slide, please. So these are the resource categories in Chapter 3, and there is an analysis of each alternative by category when applicable. Next slide, please. As you can see from the example provided here, the EIS has a 4-level classification scheme. Tables in each resource section in Chapter 3 identify adverse and beneficial impact level definitions for all biological, physical, and socioeconomic resources that the proposed project and the alternatives could potentially affect. In addition, impacts are defined in terms of their duration. In this example of potential impact levels for benthic resources within the project area, impact classifications are defined for both adverse and beneficial impacts where applicable. Temporary impacts are effects that end as soon as the activity ceases. And for an example, this would be a road closure or traffic delays during onshore cable installation. Once construction is complete, the impact would end. Short-term effects are effects that may extend beyond construction, potentially lasting several months, but not several years or longer. An example would be clearing of onshore shrubland vegetation during construction. The area would be revegetated, and when construction is complete and after revegetation is successful, this effect would end. Long-term effects are effects that last for a long period of time, especially decades or longer. An example would be the loss of habitat where a foundation was installed. Permanent effects have no expected end. So an example would be the conversion of land to support new onshore facilities or the placement of scour protection that is not removed as part of decommissioning. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the resources that were concluded to experience minor or lower impacts from the proposed action. And these include demographics, employment, economics, environmental justice, land use and coastal infrastructure, other uses such as aviation, undersea cables, marine minerals, recreation and tourism, air quality, water quality, bats, birds, terrestrial habitats and fauna, wetlands, and other waters of the U.S. Discussions of these resource areas can mostly be found in Appendix G of the draft EIS, while some of the resources are discussed in Chapter 3. Next slide, please. And these are the resources that could all experience up to moderate impacts from the proposed action. So navigation and vessel traffic, other uses such as radar systems, military uses, benthic resources, coastal habitats and fauna, finfish invertebrates and essential fish habitat, marine mammals and sea turtles. When evaluated in the context of cumulative activities, these impact levels were the same both with or without the proposed action taking place. Each resource analysis in Chapter 3 also includes a discussion of potential mitigation measures that could be applied to reduce these impacts. Next slide, please. Resources that were concluded to experience potentially up to major impacts from the proposed action when combined with cumulative activities include commercial fisheries and for hire recreational fishing, cultural resources, scientific research and surveys, as well as scenic and visual resources and U.S. Coast Guard search and rescue activities. And again, the draft EIS includes a discussion of potential mitigation measures that could be applied to reduce these potential effects. Next slide, please. So the proposed action may also result in potential beneficial effects. Air quality and environmental justice could potentially experience beneficial impacts through reduced net greenhouse gas emissions in the area of analysis over long term. Benthic habitats, birds, finfish, recreational fishing, marine mammals, and sea turtles could experience potentially beneficial artificial reef effects. And economics, employment, and coastal infrastructure could benefit through job creation and supporting designated uses at ports. In addition, the estimated capacity range for this project is up to 2,600 megawatts, which could power more than 900,000 homes per year. Next slide, please. So each alternative has been analyzed both alone and with ongoing offshore wind activities, and additionally, when combined with other reasonably foreseeable planned actions. Tables ES3 in the executive summary, as well as table 2.4-1 in chapter 2, provides a summary comparison of the alternatives in table format. On the slide is an example for benthic resources. So alternative C's incremental impact to benthic resources, especially the relocation of the export cables from certain resource areas, would be reduced when compared to the proposed action, but would remain negligible to moderate beneficial. A more detailed narrative comparison of the alternatives is provided at the conclusion of each resource section in chapter 3. Next slide, please. So as far as next steps, comments received today and during the comment period will be assessed and considered by BOEM and the cooperating agencies during preparation of the final EIS. Necessary changes to the document will be made in response to comments and new information, and responses to comments will be provided in an appendix to the final EIS. The final EIS will also identify a preferred alternative. Next slide, please. So the 60-day comment period on the draft EIS ends on February 21st. And the next steps in the EIS schedule is to publish the final EIS, which is currently targeted for September of 2023, and to issue the record of decision, which is targeted for October of 2023. Next slide, please. So you can provide comments on the draft EIS by using regulations.gov, providing verbal comments during any of our public hearings, or by mailing written comments to the Office of Renewable Energy Programs at the address provided on this slide. Comments must be postmarked no later than February 21st, 2023. If you prefer to submit your comments electronically, please visit www.regulations.gov and search for docket number BOEM-2022-0070 and click on the comment button. As a reminder, BOEM does not consider anonymous comments, so please include your name and address as part of your submittal. All comments will be made part of the public record and may be publicly posted without change. Next slide, please. And finally, to be most helpful, comments should be as specific as possible. So for example, a useful substantive comment would discuss the accuracy of the information, suggest alternate methodologies and the reasons why they should be used, provide new information relevant to the analysis, identify a different source of credible research, which if used in the analysis could result in different effects, or provides clarification where needed. Next slide, please. And so this concludes the BOEM portion of today's presentation. I really do appreciate everyone's time and attention. And now I will turn it back over to Todd.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Just a reminder where we are in the meeting here. We've got one more presentation coming up from Army Corps, and then we'll get to the comments section. I've shared a list of names in the chat. Those are the folks that indicated when they registered for the meeting that they would like to speak this afternoon. So that's the order I'll be calling on folks. If your hand is raised and you're not on that list, that just means you're not in the first 6. So now is the time. Go ahead and get your hands up. We've got a number of questions in the Q&A as well. Keep typing those in now because the Q&A will close when we start answering questions. So we'll get through Army Corps, take a break, comments, we'll take another break, And then when we get to the Q&A, we will be closing the opportunity to pose questions. So get your hand raised now if you want to speak, get your questions in if you want to get an answer. But first, we're going to go to Tammy for the Army Corps.
Good evening. My name is Tammy Turley. I'm Chief of the Regulatory Division of the New England District Corps of Engineers. Thank you for attending today and providing input on this proposal. Your participation is vital to a productive and thorough environmental review. Today, I will provide an overview of the Corps of Engineers regulatory program authorities, the proposed impacts associated with the New England Wind project within our authority, and our evaluation process. The mission of the Corps of Engineers regulatory program is to protect the nation's aquatic resources and navigable capacity while allowing economic development through fair and balanced decisions. Next slide. The National Environmental Policy Act evaluation is required for proposals requesting federal authorization from the Corps of Engineers. For this proposal, as you've heard, BOEM is the lead federal agency for the NEPA review, and the Corps is serving as a cooperating agency in this review and intends to utilize the BOEM-led environmental impact statement to also serve as the Corps of Engineers NEPA review. On the next slide, I will introduce the Corps of Engineers regulatory authorities that are applicable to this project. The Corps of Engineers regulatory program is primarily administered under two authorities, Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act and Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. The diagram depicts the limits of Corps of Engineers authority in tidal waters and fresh waters. On the next few slides, I will speak more specifically to the impacts proposed under each of these authorities. Under Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, the Corps regulates structures and other work in navigable waters. For this project, the shoreward limit of navigable waters is the mean high water line of Nantucket Sound, and the seaward limit is 3 nautical miles measured from the baseline of the territorial seas. The proposed work regulated within navigable waters is outlined in red on this figure, and this work includes the 5 export cables, the dredging and fill for the installation of the cables, the horizontal directional drilling work and exit pits, and any hard armoring for cable protection. Next slide. Also under Section 10, the Corps regulates structures on the outer continental shelf. For this project, those regulated structures associated with the project are outlined in red on the figure. These structures include the turbines, offshore substations, all associated cables, and any required hard armoring for cable protection. Next slide. Under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, the Corps of Engineers regulates the discharge of dredged or fill material into waters of the United States. For this project, the shoreward limit of waters of the U.S. is the high tide line of Nantucket Sound, and the seaward limit of WOTUS extends 3 nautical miles as measured from the baseline of the territorial seas. The applicant has not proposed impacts to non-tidal waters. Next slide. Proposed activities subject to Clean Water Act Section 404 authority occur within the area outlined in red on the figure. The proposed 404 discharges are related to the cable installation and include the backfilling of the trench during cable laying and the redeposition of dredged material within the horizontal directional drill exit pits. Discharges also include the placement of hard armor as needed for cable protection. Next slide. The Corps of Engineers published a public notice on September 23rd with a 60-day comment period. The public notice and plans may be accessed by following the link on the slide, then looking under regulatory permitting public notices. On the next slide, I will speak more specifically to the proposed impacts and regulatory authority for each activity. The proposed impacts are listed for each activity and authority for phase 1 of the project, Park City Wind. The proposed temporary impacts are primarily related to installation of the wind farm components. The permanent impacts are related to the structures themselves and any hard armoring placed over the cables for protection. This figure depicts the proposed phases and the associated turbine layout, one of the potential turbines, and the proposed layout of the inner array cables. The next slide lists the proposed temporary and permanent impacts for phase 2 and are listed for each activity and authority. I'll now speak more specifically to our evaluation process. Next slide. And next slide. The core public notice serves as the initiation of the public interest review. This review includes an evaluation of the probable impacts of the proposed activity on the public interest. The public interest review factors are listed on the slide. The core balances the benefits that may reasonably accrue from the proposal against its reasonably foreseeable detriments. Our decision will reflect the national concern for both the protection and utilization of these important resources. The Corps may only issue a permit if the proposal is found to not be contrary to the public interest. And next slide, please. The 404B1 guidelines apply to work within the Section 404 jurisdiction. To reach compliance with these guidelines, the Corps is unable to authorize a proposed discharge if there is a practical alternative to the proposed discharge that would have less adverse effect on the aquatic ecosystem, so long as such alternative does not have other significant adverse environmental consequences. The Corps must identify the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative and may only permit that alternative. This figure shows some, but not all, of the potential alternatives that would be considered under this evaluation. And next slide. Lastly, when making a permit decision, the Corps must ensure compliance with other federal laws, including but not limited to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, and the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Management Act. BOEM is also serving as the lead federal agency for these consultations. The Corps must also ensure that appropriate tribal consultation has occurred and that we meet our important tribal trust responsibilities. In addition, on the state level, a 401 water quality certification and a coastal zone management consistency determination are required prior to the issuance of a Corps permit. That includes the Corps of Engineers overview. Back to you, Todd.
Great. Thank you, Tammy. We are going to take a quick break. There we go. We'll take a quick 5-minute break, but just a reminder, if you do want to speak during the listening session, please get your hand raised now. The first batch of people I'll be calling on are in the chat. And if you would like to get a response to a question, now is the time to be typing those into the Q&A. So I have got 5:44 on my clocks. We'll be back in 5 minutes at 5:49, and we will move to the listening session. So we'll be right back. All right, that I've got 5:49 on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If we could go to the next slide, Monica, if we could. All right, well, Monica is trying to get the slides advanced. Just again, an announcement. This is one opportunity for you to provide comments during this listening session. We are going to provide 5 minutes for you to provide comments. In order to be respectful of everyone's time here tonight, we are going to limit it to 5 minutes. So if we get to the end of your time, we do ask that you complete your comments in writing or online. Next slide, please, Monica. And the order tonight, we have 5 people that have indicated a desire to speak when they registered. So I'll be calling on those folks first. You can see those names in the chat. If you are on the phone and would like to speak, raise your hand by pressing *9. If you're online, just click on the raise hand icon, and I will get to those folks after this first list, after we get through the first list. So when I call on you, we'll ask you to say and spell your first and last name. If we could go ahead and skip to the next slide, please. Called upon, I'll invite you to unmute. Click the unmute, state and spell your name when you start, indicate any organization you're with, and again, 5 minutes. So let's go ahead and move ahead to the, there we go, the countdown. So you'll be able to see on your screen as the time counts down. So we are going to start with Mike Okanewski. If you could come off mute first, say and spell your name and go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Mike Okanewski, and that's okay. I think you can spell Mike, but Okoneiewski. I've been in fisheries business 53 years now, primarily just concentrating on consulting and policy at this point. Got involved with wind energy about 5 years ago. I, like a lot of the fisheries people, are real worried about what it's going to look like with turbines out there and fishing boats trying to get out there also. I see a potential for a large amount of displacement, but that's not my comment subject today. And that is, I've been spending a little bit of time when I can looking up stuff on the environment, I guess, or ecosystems more correctly. And the question I have, and I haven't heard it mentioned, I think I saw it somewhere in the presentation, but really no definitive information on what steps have been taken to measure, and that is phytoplankton. And it's a real foundational element, I guess, in the ecosystem and productivity as to, all the way up to whales. And it's the baseline of which everything kind of starts building up on that. And I've read different articles that would suggest that some scientists are pretty concerned about what may happen to phytoplankton blooming and whatnot with the changes in wind forces that will be imparted by the wind turbines themselves and the wind farms. And as more farms come online, it would seem that the cumulative effects would expand also with that. There's not really been in my mind anyway, a clear definition of anybody doing cumulative effects where you take multiple wind farms in a region or all the wind farms in a region and attempt to pair that up. And not only at the beginning stage, but also at the 2050 stage when you have all your turbines up that you envision. And I think that you can't do much analysis if you don't have the research, but I would question whether that research is going to happen. And if there's going to be an analytical study of that, just on the phytoplankton alone, but also lower trophic forage that, whales consume, sardines, herring, everything. And what interference, if any, or impacts there may be on these lower trophic levels of fish, and there's or copepods or whatever it is. But there's definitely a change after the wind has gone through the turbines. There's wind wakes. There may be some changes on the West Coast, they think, to upwelling. They don't know if that's good or bad, but salinity and temperature and other factors that feed into this, the productivity levels are very important to not only a continuation of fishing in the future, but also to seabirds, whales, and other endangered species in some cases. And I just would like to know what plans there are to include that in a ecosystem / environmental study. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mike. Just as a reminder for everyone, if you do want a response to any question or anything during the Q&A portion, we do need you to type your question into the Q&A. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. Click on the Q&A icon, type in your question, and then when we get to that section of the meeting, you will get a response. Not everyone that indicated a desire to speak when they registered is in the list of folks I see in the meeting. So I'll call on names. They may not come on and speak. Dylan Gust. I don't see a Dylan in the meeting. Dylan, if you're in under a name, please get your hand raised and we'll get you later on into the lineup here. But I do not see a Dylan Gust in the list of people that are in the meeting. Next is Michael Jones. So Michael, I'm going to allow you to speak. If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead and you're ready to go. Please say and spell your name if you want to come on and provide your comments. Okay, not seeing Michael coming off mute. Michael, if you're having trouble, please put something in the chat. And we'll get back to you later on in the meeting. The next person that is signed up, again, I'm not seeing a Michael Perrin. Michael Perrin, if you are logged in under a different name, please raise your hand and we will call on you later on in the meeting. And the next person that's in the list, Audra's reached out. She does not wish to give a comment, so we're going to skip past Audra. Suzanne Conley, we're going to come to you next. If you could say and spell your name, Suzanne, and the organization you're with, and then we'll start the timer for you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Suzanne Conley, SUSANNE-CONLEY, and I'm here tonight representing the group Save Greater Dowses Beach. I'd like to make a general comment about the developer's proposal being considered here and then ask a question that I have also submitted in writing. As BOEM is aware by now, my group is one of a growing number of ad hoc and established civic associations that are mounting objections to the onshore plans of this and other developers that have been awarded leases on the Outer Continental Shelf. My group will be submitting a comprehensive response to the DEIS, but in the meantime, we want to remind BOEM that our local environment, an active wildlife habitat, and a village and town's way of life are at stake. We believe you must take the environmental and socioeconomic impacts of cable landings as discussed in the project proposal before you as seriously as you take construction plans on the OCS. The fact of the matter, in our opinion, is that the developer gave short shrift in their proposal to the nearshore and onshore impacts of their plans as they relate to phase 2 of the COP. Additionally, their proposal, as we've mentioned, is inconsistent with plans submitted to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and therefore must bear the weight of extreme scrutiny in the final DEIS. I'm sorry, the final EIS. In fact, we feel this proposal should never have been allowed inclusion on the so-called FAST-41 regulatory approval track, despite the current administration's objectives. The developer should never have been allowed to keep results of their environmental studies hidden from the public by declaring what they learned proprietary, resulting in an unacceptable level of redaction in Volume 2 of the COP. The stakes, in our view, are simply too high. BOEM must ask why nearly 3,000 individuals, horrified by the proposed transformation of a beloved small beach and estuary into a public utility, have signed our group's petition to prevent this landfall, especially given alternatives that make much, much more sense. BOEM must ask why the developer insists on landing cables at one of the few areas in the OECC identified as complex habitat. We will provide much more information about the dangerous and potentially catastrophic outcomes the current Phase 2 cable landing plan may engender. We'd like to thank you for holding these public hearings. As you know, we've attended every one and made comments at every one, and in listening to our concerns.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I do see your question in the Q&A. Thank you. That is the end of the people that signed up during pre-registration. So now we're going to move to the folks that have raised their hand during the meeting. Just a reminder, if you do want to speak during the comment section, now is the time to get your hand up. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more names in the queue right now. But also, if you do want to get a response to a question, please type your question into the Q&A and we will get to that after the comment session. That Q&A box, we will stop receiving questions once we start answering questions coming up after the listening session. So the next order on the list here, we've got 2 folks lined up, then I've got another two that I will get out momentarily. Carl Van Warmerdam, you are on next. Let me invite you to unmute yourself.
Carl Van Warmerdam, CarlVanWarmerdam, advocate for North Atlantic right whale. The biggest threat to whales and the ocean ecosystem that they live in is climate change. Climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions. These are created by industrial development. So climate change is a symptom of industrial development. That is extractive industries of mining, deforestation, agriculture, factory, fishing, and dams, which provide through production, manufacture, transport, installation, operation, the current conveniences of a modern way of human life. Industrial development destroys ecosystems. More industrial development by the installation of hundreds of offshore wind turbines will not solve the problem of climate change. There's one inescapable truth about the headlong rush to cover vast swaths of the countryside and oceans with 900-foot high wind turbines. The more turbines that get built, the more wildlife will be harmed or killed. And no amount of greenwashing can change that fact. The production of materials, as well as manufacturing processes for wind turbines and associated infrastructure of the extracted energy storage and transmission are made possible by burning fossil fuels. To obtain the raw materials used in wind turbine, habitat is destroyed through open pit mining, mountaintop removal. These are then transported to processing plants to be turned into component parts. It will take a tremendous amount of energy to mine the materials, transport, and transform them through industrial processes like smelting to turn them into wind turbines, batteries, infrastructure, and industrial machinery. Install all of the above and do this at a sufficient scale to replace the current fossil fuel-based industrial system. In the early stages of the process, this energy will have to come mostly from fossil fuel, since they supply 80% of the current global energy. Add to the current use of emissions. After manufacture, the turbine parts need to be transported to the location. Construction and operation of offshore wind increases boat traffic, also leading to more greenhouse gas emissions and pollution, all of which adds to a non-existent carbon budget and thus increasing climate change, not to mention the increased risk to marine mammals from vessel strikes. All of that energy has a carbon payback period. The paradox of renewable energies is that you need unprecedented volumes of non-renewable mined materials. Increasing renewables means large uptakes in battery metals such as copper, cobalt, lithium, and nickel. Wind turbines need rare earth metals such as neodymium, of which there are scarce amounts. But the work won't stop there. Closed mines themselves are a huge source of devastation. If all mining stopped today, it would still be an area the size of Austria with degraded and some dangerous levels of heavy metals. Mining brings back up locked resources. So the concept of carbon footprint should be added to carbon, the material footprint should be added to carbon footprint and should be taken into consideration by governments. If not, the planet's scarce non-renewable resources will be continued to be destroyed. These factors will more than offset BOEM's calculations for climate change in the DEIS. For the right whale, the potential of loss of one species is the difference between survival and extinction. So BOEM is basing its conclusions in the DEIS on false analysis of offshore wind turbines will reduce climate change. They will not. It makes no sense to increase disturbance to whales when they are suffering through a usual mortality event. Whales are a keystone species, a canary in the coal mine. As they go, so do we. That in the effort to save the climate, we continue a business as usual. We are destroying the environment. If we continue with this offshore wind project, it will be humans that experience an unusual mortality event. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I've got three more folks that are indicated a desire to speak. Next up is going to be Eric Picard. Eric, if you want to come off mute and say and spell your first and last name and any organization you're with, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Eric Pekar, P-E-C-K-A-R is my last name, first name Eric, E-R-I-K. I'm with Vineyard Power. First, want to thank BOEM for allowing me to provide comments this evening. I'm speaking on behalf of Vineyard Power, a nonprofit membership organization representing over 3,500 islanders on Martha's Vineyard in support of the draft environmental impact statement for the New England Wind Construction Operations Plan. All 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard have committed to being 100% renewable in transportation, heating, and electricity by 2040. Our island cannot reach these targets without offshore wind, and the New England Wind Project is critical in helping not only our island, but Massachusetts reach these goals. New England Wind was cited after a lengthy stakeholder and community engagement process with the federal government, a few of which are probably on the line listening right now, and I've had a long-standing relationship with folks in BOEM, and I really appreciate you all giving us the time to speak here, and as well as included representation from across Martha's Vineyard. Avangrid has been an accessible, transparent, and responsive community partner throughout its ongoing development and permitting. Building on the successful relationships with local communities gained over the course of permitting and developing the first project, Vineyard Wind 1, Avangrid has demonstrated that project impacts due to construction will be minimized using carefully cited buried transmission, time of year restrictions for both marine and upland construction, coordination with municipal infrastructure construction, and proven traffic, erosion control, and stormwater mitigation measures. New England Wind is a critical transmission project for our Commonwealth and the region, delivering an additional 2,000 megawatts of clean electricity into our grid, which will save ratepayers money and contribute to the growth of a new industry here in New England and on the South Coast. Once completed, the project will result in an annual reduction of more than 4 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions across New England, which is the equivalent of removing over 800,000 cars from the road each year. I would also like to respectfully note that there are already 12 existing cable landings on our beloved beaches on Cape and the islands, including Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, and there are plans for an additional 4 more in the next few years, all of these unrelated to offshore wind. These ocean and onshore cable infrastructure projects are necessary for the integration of our islands into the electrical grid, and certainly not a new concept in terms of construction and implementation for our region and our local communities on the Cape and Islands. On behalf of our approximately 3,500 members, Vineyard Power Cooperative expresses our full support for all aspects of the New England project. Renewable energy projects at this industrial scale are essential if our local towns, the Commonwealth, and the nation are to achieve our ambitious goals set to combat climate change. And again, I want to thank you all for providing an opportunity to provide feedback on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I've got two more folks on the list, although one hand has gone down. So we're going to go to Angela Sanfilippo. We're going to go to you next. If you want to come off mute and say and spell your name. Go ahead when you're ready. Angela, it looks like you're off mute, but I don't think your microphone is working. I'm going to try to mute you and try it one more time. All right, it looks like Angela's mic is not, oh, did I hear you? No, it looks like Angela's mic is not working. So I'm going to call on the next person. We'll try to get back to you again here, Angela. Maybe try disconnecting your microphone and plugging it back in, and we'll try to get back to you here in just a moment. The last person that indicated a desire to speak, though your hand is down now, Gary Yerman. I'm going to see if you want to come on and speak.
Do you hear me now?
We can hear you, Gary. Go ahead and say and spell your name and go ahead.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gary Yerman, G-A-R-Y-Y-E-R-M-A-N. I'm a commercial fisherman and have been involved in the fishing industry for over 50 years. My son and I own New London Seafood Distributors, a New London, Connecticut-based seafood unloading facility since 1989. At our peak, 10 years or so ago, we unloaded 6 to 8 million pounds of seafood annually due to severe government restrictions, low fish stocks, sustainable fishers rebuilding programs, low quotas, COVID prices. The COVID prices due to lower demands resulting for COVID has dropped that production to less than 2 million pounds. 4 years ago, myself and another commercial fisherman attended numerous offshore wind meetings to see how this new offshore wind industry would impact us. After many hearings, we went to Northern Ireland, Kilkeel, to talk firsthand with some European fishermen how offshore wind affected their fishing and opportunities afforded to them. They have had success on both sides. Fishing is stable. Their boats work the year round, fishing when it is good, when farming the balance of the year. I speak here tonight on behalf of New London Seafood and as a co-founder of Sea Services North America. Myself and 5 others formed Sea Service North America to raise the opportunities similar to what we witnessed in Europe. And we are dedicated to bring our fishing vessels the highest standards of safety equipment, training, and support. As commercial fishermen, we are always businessmen concerned with our environment and communities and do business and raise our families. Sea Services and many of its fishing partners have chosen to pursue a sustainable and productive way to be at the table. We recognize the commitment offshore wind has brought forward to the fishermen, their commitment in listening to their fears and provide information to address them. For the past 3 years, Sea Service North America has provided commercial fishing, scout, and safety vessels for offshore wind. We have completed thousands of miles of scouting with no issues of gear knockdowns and interactions between research boats, profiling the bottom, and commercial fishermen, lobstermen, crab fishermen. And it has been this success that these scout vessels has provided that have provided further opportunities to commercial fishermen as safety guard vessels. These contracts will supplement fishermen's revenue that have been offset by regulations and quotas. We urge you to move forward with this project as quickly as possible. Early work in this area will be much better at this time of year, much less impact on the fishing industry and the boating community, just because of the winter period and there's less people on the water. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any of them.
Thank you, Gary, for your comments. We're going to try Angela Sanfilippo one more time here, and I apologize if you're having technical troubles. Angela, it looks like you're off mute. Are you there? Yeah, we're not able to hear your comments during this listening session, but just a reminder, there are other ways to provide comments and feedback on the DEIS, either in writing or online, as was laid out during the presentation earlier this afternoon. So I apologize, Angela. It's your mic is just not working tonight. So we are going to bring the listening session to a close. We're going to take one more quick 5-minute break. This is last call for questions. If you have a question that you would like to hear a response to here this evening, please type that into the Q&A. We're going to take a 5-minute break. It is 6:15. We will come back at 6:20, and at that time, the Q&A will close. And we will commence with the answering of the questions that have been received. So we will be back in 5 minutes. Okay, we are going to get restarted. Welcome back, everybody. We are ready to start answering the questions that have been received via the Q&A. So we are going to move to that portion, the Q&A. We're going to close. We're not going to accept any more questions at this time. We're going to answer the ones that we received. So we're going to go ahead and move to the first question that's ready to go. And we're going to start with a question from Suzanne Conley. Does BOEM give the same scrutiny to the environmental impacts of proposed electricity export cable landings as it does regarding construction on the OCS? And does BOEM's regulatory authority extend to approval or disapproval of cable landings if proposed plans are found wanting? So Christine, I think you're up for this one.
Yes, thanks for the question. So I'm Christine Crumpton. I am the NEPA coordinator for the New England project. So BOEM conducts the same level of analysis for the export cables and landings as it does for wind turbine installation on the outer continental shelf. This is true for the NEPA analysis as well as all applicable consultations, including but not limited to Endangered Species Act, Essential Fish Habitat, and Section 106. Under the National Historic Preservation Act. BOEM's ultimate decision to approve with modifications, or disapprove will be on the entire contents of the construction and operations plan, which would include the proposed export cables and landings.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. We're going to go ahead and jump to the next question that we received. And this question comes from Carl Van Warmerdam. Is U.S. offshore wind development linked to any whale deaths? And this one we're going to turn to Kyle.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Baker. I'm a biologist with BOEM. There's currently no evidence that offshore wind activities are linked to whale deaths. We are closely monitoring the current stranding event involving humpback whales along the eastern seaboard. We are coordinating with the National Marine Fisheries Service, who is the lead agency overseeing the response to the strandings. Currently, only pre-construction surveys are occurring that are associated with offshore wind. BOEM does require these geophysical survey vessels to carry protected species observers, and we review all the reports that are submitted to BOEM from these observers regarding whale sightings and other information. For construction and operation of the offshore wind farms, similar monitoring and reporting is proposed, so BOEM can continue to monitor the offshore activity. The proposed mitigation monitoring and reporting conditions for this project can be found in Appendix H of the DEIS. And BOEM welcomes any comments that will help us with our analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And we're going to come to you for the next one here as well. What takes priority, building offshore wind development or protecting whales if they are mutually exclusive?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you. BOEM is committed to promoting offshore wind development in an environmentally responsible manner. Multiple laws and regulations direct BOEM to facilitate both offshore wind development and to assess and minimize any potential impacts to the environment, which does include whales. These laws include this process under the National Environmental Policy Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Endangered Species Act. BOEM is committed to avoiding and minimizing any potential impacts to whales and welcomes any information that will help us complete that assessment for this project. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Kyle. Our next question, we got two similar questions, both from Michael Dean. So I'll read both questions and then we're just going to provide one response because these were similar questions. With 26 active offshore wind leases in the Atlantic Ocean, why has BOEM not initiated, undertaken, or issued a programmatic environmental impact assessment on all the projects as a whole? And the second question, also from Michael Dean, is BOEM of the opinion that NEPA does not require a programmatic environmental impact assessment? And we're going to turn to Christine for this one.
Thank you for the question. So BOEM is conducting a programmatic environmental impact statement, or PEIS, for the New York Bight lease areas. The New York Bight areas are an ideal location to analyze the environmental effects of development of multiple lease areas within a regional context due to the number and proximity of the individual leases and the relative uniformity of seafloor bottom type, benthic habitat, and species distribution. In addition, the timing of the New York Bight PEIS post-lease issuance lessens the impact of the rapidly changing technology in the offshore wind industry. So a general PEIS, if done many years ago, would not have benefited from the regional similarities and timing that are present for the New York Bight PEIS. The rapid development and changes in technology in the offshore wind industry would have rendered this analysis of limited use for the current COPs being analyzed by BOEM. BOEM will learn from the New York Bight PEIS and will evaluate future lease areas and determine if a programmatic analysis is appropriate. So while BOEM has not proposed to conduct a programmatic environmental impact assessment that would include this project, BOEM does analyze the past, present, and reasonably future actions in each EIS. This includes future planned offshore wind facilities. The planned activity scenario under which the cumulative impact analysis is based can be found in Appendix E of the New England Wind Draft Environmental Impact Statement. And Section 3.7.2 includes an analysis of potential impacts from construction of those projects, including potential pile driving activity from 2022 to 2029. So see Table 3.7-7.
Thank you, Christine. And just as a reminder, we are no longer accepting questions during this Q&A portion. We did close the Q&A box once we started responding to questions. So we're going to get through the questions that were turned in before we started answering these questions. So our next question, we do not have a name who this came in, some feedback here. Can these presentations be broken into smaller presentations to encourage conversation? Also, jargon is not always understood by listeners. So Christine, could you handle this one?
Yeah, thank you for your feedback on the format of our virtual public meetings. We do understand that the use of jargon and acronyms could be difficult for listeners to understand, and we do our best to limit the use of jargon and define all acronyms. So these virtual public hearings are an opportunity for public involvement and include an opportunity to provide comments on the draft EIS. And we also offer a Q&A portion, which presents opportunities for questions to be asked during the presentations. We are always looking for ways to improve, and we'll keep your feedback in mind for when we plan for future meetings.
And I just read that whole question on mute. I apologize. It happens every meeting. Next question, again, no name. So did you mention that an EJ benefit is net CO2 reductions? Could you explain why this accrues as an EJ benefit instead of a general public benefit? And Megan, we'll look to you to answer this one.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm Megan Cornelissen. I am a social scientist with BOEM. And to answer your question, thank you for your question. But yes, to answer, the potential beneficial impacts of reduced greenhouse gas emissions are identified in the air quality analysis in Appendix G and are also called out specific to beneficial impacts related to environmental justice, because environmental justice populations, and that is minority and low-income populations as identified in Executive Order 12898, face specific vulnerabilities related to the effects of climate change. But to answer your question, yes, the beneficial impacts from greenhouse gas emissions overall are discussed in the air quality analysis and are treated as a general public benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Next question is from Scott McLean. How far below Dosas Beach will the cables be, and has the possibility of electromagnetic pollution that could, for example, affect sunbathers on the beach been explored? And I believe is Renee. I'm not sure who's answering this one.
Hello, sorry about that. Thanks so much for the question. My name is Renee Richards, and I'm a geophysicist with the Engineering and Technical Review Bench for BOEM. Although the horizontal drilling trajectory is still undergoing engineering refinement, it's estimated that the trajectory will result in the HD passing at a depth of approximately 9 meters or 30 feet below the ground surface at mean high water. The effects of the electromagnetic fields, or the EMF, will not penetrate to the depths that are expected to be achieved at the Dowses Beach landfall site. Additional information about effects of EMFs from undersea power cables can be found on BOEM's website, and we'll post the links to some of those studies there for further information. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. And we do have 2 more questions we're going to get to that came in before we close the Q&A. This next one came in from Michael Kanuski. What plans are there to study the effects of the wind energy removal by turbines in wind wakes and lower trophic forage, starting with phytoplankton, as this is a foundational base for ecosystem productivity? Any ill effects caused by a removal of energy normally transferred to the ocean may have impacts on fish stocks and a list of endangered species dependent on this productivity of this forage. What research and analysis will be put forward in the EIS to ensure we know if there will be lower ecosystem productivity when the wind projects are a major part of the ocean habitat? And I believe Brian is going to answer this one.
Thanks. Hi, Mr. Okanowski. Good to hear from you again. Brian Hooker here. So BOEM will continue to use the best available information to inform our project-specific analyses. It's no different regarding if we're talking about wind wake effects and hydrodynamics, and how they may influence, sea surface stress, and then the onsetting impacts to marine living resources. The New England Wind DEIS discusses these effects under the impact producing factor of presence of structures. So if you are looking in each of the sections, you go to presence of structures, and we talk about the hydrodynamic effects of presence of structures on each of those resource areas. BOEM has also, to answer your question about, what additional studies BOEM is doing, BOEM has completed a study modeling all of the southern New England lease areas. And I think we're going to put that in the chat, or if that's not already in there. Yes, thanks for putting that in there. And that study, which is one of the referenced materials in the DEIS, mentions that, looks at not only the hydrodynamic impacts themselves, the effects on the sea surface and bottom layers, but also modeled changes in larval distribution of scallop, whiting, and summer flounder larvae. So while the model was able to detect some changes, they were not significantly different than natural variability. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of studies out there that are modeling these effects, and I think it's really important to take a look at the hub height and the type of turbines that are being modeled in all these scenarios, because there's a lot of information around a very complex system to model. So appreciate that, and if you have any additional comments, please submit them. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. And I believe we are down to our last question. And again, no name with this one. Regarding bringing cables into Dowses Beach, what, if any, ways will you try to ensure that cables going under East Bay, which is one of the possible routes from the beach, will not pierce the freshwater aquifer that lies under the bay? And I believe Renee is going to answer this one as well.
All right, thanks so much for the question. Potential effects to resources are evaluated under the Clean Water Act by the EPA as part of the permitting process. The depth of the proposed activities is too shallow to interact with the closed aquifer system underlying offshore Cape Cod. Thanks for your question.
Great, thank you, Renee. And that brings the Q&A section to a close. So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to turn it over to Jess for closing comments. But thank you for joining us here tonight. Jess, whenever you're ready, come on.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jess Stromberg, and I'm the Acting Chief of the Environment Branch for Renewable Energy in the Office of Renewable Energy Programs at BOEM. I want to thank the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, ERM, and BOEM staff for holding a successful virtual public hearing for the New England Wind Draft Environmental Impact Statement. We had a good turnout for this meeting, peaking at around 63 participants. And to everyone that participated today, I want to thank you for spending this time with us and for the thoughtful comments and questions that you submitted. All of the comments received today and during the comment period will be assessed and considered by BOEM during preparation of the final environmental impact statements. I hope you have been provided a good forum to share your comments on aspects of the project that are of concern to you and that you found our answers to your questions both useful and responsive. Your input is essential to ensure that the best informed decision will be made for the proposed project. And I want to reiterate that there are multiple methods available for you to provide your comments on the draft environmental impact statement by February 21st, 2023. Comments can be submitted through regulations.gov using docket number BOEM-2022-0070 or mailed to BOEM enclosed in an envelope labeled New England Wind DEIS and addressed to Program Manager, Office of Renewable Energy Programs, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, 45600 Woodland Road, Sterling, Virginia, 20166. A reminder, a recording of today's virtual meeting, as well as the other two virtual meetings, will be posted on BOEM's New England Wind Virtual Meeting Room webpage. Thank you again for participating in today's virtual public hearing.